On this Friday night, is a vaccine shortage looming?
We need more vaccines.
The pleas to protect more Canadians from COVID-19 as Ontario's caseload hits an all-time high. Efforts to restrict President Trump's access to the nuclear codes and get him impeached a second time. Britain's deadliest day of the pandemic.
The virus is out of control.
Walked into the unit to find nurses crying.
The COVID crisis pushes London hospitals to the brink. And 1 year after flight PS 752 was shot down,
I'm driving a lot during the night because I can't sleep.
loved ones of those killed struggle to cope with the heartbreaking loss.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the impact of the pandemic on Canadians. There are multiple warning signs the weeks ahead could be worse than anything we've seen since the coronavirus first arrived in Canada a year ago. Case counts are rising and more Canadians are becoming seriously ill. More than 4,000 Canadians are in the hospital with COVID-19 right now. Over 800 of them are in critical care. An average of 136 deaths are being reported every day. Ontario smashed its daily case record today, more than 4,200 new cases. A record 369 people are in intensive care in Ontario, 250 of them on ventilators.
This is so serious. Matter of fact, this is the most serious situation we've ever been in, ever, since the beginning of this pandemic.
It's a sign public health restrictions are not working. Premier Ford said further measures are coming, but he didn't spell out when or whether they'll include closing non-essential businesses and imposing a curfew. That's what Quebec has done. The 4-week lockdown and curfew begins there tomorrow. Manitoba has extended its strict lockdown for another 2 weeks. And Alberta's top doctors said today the first case of the South African variant of COVID-19 has been detected in Alberta. She says it's a recent traveler who is in quarantine, and there's no evidence at this time the mutated virus has spread to others. There is news tonight, too, about vaccines. Some premiers are warning about a looming shortage, and the federal government says it's trying to accelerate deliveries. David Akin has our top story tonight.
All I need is vaccines. If there's one thing the federal government can do, and they're trying their best, we need more vaccines.
Ontario's premier is not the only one pleading for more doses. Everyone is. In Toronto, a clinic run by the University Health Network, or UHN, was set to exhaust its vaccine supply Friday.
We will then have used up all of the stock that's available for the clinic at UHN. And unfortunately, we have many more staff who are anxious to be inoculated.
The problem? Ottawa's ability to supply vaccines will not catch up to the province's ability to administer vaccines for weeks.
This initial phase, or phase one, is characterized by a limited and steady supply of vaccines for much of January, February, and March, before we see a significant ramp-up leading into April.
Canada should get 6 million doses by the end of March, but that's only enough to inoculate 3 million Canadians because both Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech are 2-dose vaccines, and officials say it is crucial to reserve that second dose as per the manufacturer's recommendations.
In terms of getting to that peak effectiveness levels, you do need the second dose.
To pick up the pace of vaccine distribution, some of the vaccine candidates already purchased by the government have to get Health Canada approval. And if that does not happen, the government will not hit its target of inoculating everyone in Canada who wants a vaccine by September.
So the numbers that we are using for our predictions are based on the assumption that the vaccines that we have procured will indeed be approved by Health Canada.
Health Canada is looking at new vaccines from AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, and even though the UK has already approved AstraZeneca's, it may not be until the end of February before Canadian regulators are able to approve any new vaccines. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
We'll get back to the pandemic in a moment, but the other big story tonight is what's developing in Washington, D.C. The Democrats have drafted new articles of impeachment against President Trump, and there's an effort underway to restrict his access to the nuclear codes. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Trump could be dangerous in the final days of his presidency. She's spoken with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff about the process of the Nuclear Command Authority. In a letter to the Democratic caucus, Pelosi describes Trump as unhinged and said lawmakers must do everything that we can to protect the nation from him. Some people from the pro-Trump mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol are being tracked down and arrested now, including this man. Richard Barnett posed for pictures with his foot on a desk in Nancy Pelosi's office. He was arrested in Arkansas on federal charges of entering and remaining on restricted grounds, violent entry, and theft of public property. Today, President-elect Joe Biden said those who stormed into the building must be prosecuted.
They're a bunch of thugs, insurrectionists, white supremacists, anti-Semites. 6N is not enough. I mean, come on. You know, these shirts they're wearing, these are a bunch of thugs. And they're terrorists, domestic terrorists.
Canada's Prime Minister has always sidestepped directly criticizing President Trump. Today, that changed. Justin Trudeau says Donald Trump incited the violence.
What we witnessed was an assault on democracy by violent rioters, incited by the current president and other politicians.
President Trump has said he will not attend Joe Biden's inauguration on January 20th. Biden says that's just fine with him because Trump wasn't welcome anyway. Efforts are underway to fast-track a second impeachment of the president, and the U.S. Justice Department is not ruling out charging him with criminal liability for the violence. Jackson Prosco reports.
Lindsey Graham, you are a traitor to the country.
The rage of President Donald Trump's supporters.
You know it was rigged.
He's now directed at Republicans. Fierce loyalists like Senator Lindsey Graham face their wrath for defying Trump by acknowledging the legitimacy of Joe Biden's win.
It's going to be like this forever, wherever you go for the rest of your life.
The chaos extends to the White House, where there is growing pressure on Trump to resign or be removed for inciting the violent mob that stormed the Capitol with his lies about a stolen election.
To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay.
Trump's pre-recorded condemnation of his supporters included a hint that their fight is not over.
Our incredible journey is only just beginning.
In a stunning letter to the Democratic caucus, Speaker Nancy Pelosi warned that if the president does not leave office imminently and willingly, the Congress will proceed with our action. That means impeachment. Pelosi also says she spoke with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to discuss available precautions for preventing an unstable president from initiating military hostilities or ordering a nuclear strike. 12 days before Trump leaves office, even some Republicans have had enough.
I believe the president has disregarded his oath of office. He swore an oath to the American people.
For now, only Trump supporters face consequences. Arrests of those who stormed the Capitol have begun, including a West Virginia state lawmaker and a man allegedly found in possession of an assault rifle and 11 Molotov cocktails outside the Capitol.
Democrats at this hour are now circulating draft articles of impeachment. They seek to go after Trump for what they call incitement of insurrection. Those draft articles could be introduced as early as Monday for a vote by Wednesday. The question is whether they would pass through the Republican-controlled Senate, which was what it would take to remove Trump from office. At least one Republican has come forward tonight, Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, calling on Trump to resign. So there may be some votes there. It's a wait-and-see approach right now for Democrats, Donna, and the stakes are incredibly high.
All right, Jackson Prosco in Washington, thanks. Now back to the other big story. Among those being vaccinated for COVID-19 in Canada are several hundred inmates in federal institutions. It's a pilot program that got underway today. Elderly and medically vulnerable inmates will get the shot. And as Abigail Beeman explains, the project is not without controversy.
I worry for all these guys.
Sherry Meyer is a prisoner advocate with a loved one serving a life sentence at Saskatchewan Penitentiary. The prison has the highest number of active COVID-19 cases in the country, 72, but no vaccines. Meyer says because of that, inmates have been forced to stay in their cell 23 and a half hours a day.
Some guys are choosing to bird bath, as they call it, in their cells, in their sinks, as opposed to showering every day so they can contact family. It's inhumane.
Global News has learned there are now 4 vaccine clinics set up in federal institutions across the country, all in facilities with 0 active COVID cases. In a pilot program for the elderly and medically vulnerable, Correctional Service Canada says 40 inmates were to be vaccinated Friday and about 600 inmates in total. That's less than 5% of the federal prison population. This week's tweet from the Conservative leader set off a firestorm, calling for no criminals to be vaccinated ahead of vulnerable Canadians or frontline healthcare workers.
When someone becomes seriously ill in our federal institutions, they don't receive treatment within the institution. They take up an ICU bed in the hospital in the local community.
At the very least, quite obviously, that should include frontline prison staff and correctional officers.
It's something that our members are begging for right now.
The Union of Canadian Correctional Officers is calling for the federal government to roll out vaccines in the workplace, but Ottawa maintains that's up to the provinces. Inside institutions where distancing is a challenge, so far there have been nearly 1,200 COVID-19 cases behind bars and 3 deaths. Senator Kim Pate questioned some of the reporting.
I would be surprised if it was not higher. I would be surprised if the incidence is not higher than what we are hearing as well.
As for why prisons with 0 active COVID cases were chosen, CSC would only say they're following recommendations from the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, and that's where the elderly and medically vulnerable inmates live. They tell Global News planning is underway for more vaccine clinics, but they can't say when they'll open in prisons with active COVID cases. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
There's a snapshot tonight of how the economy has been affected by the pandemic, and it is worse than expected. Statistics Canada says the economy lost more than 62,000 jobs in December, the first decline since April, and more than double what economists had forecast. The data shows unemployment rose to 8.6% from 8.5% in November. Experts warn another month of job losses could be on the horizon as holiday restrictions are extended due to the surge in cases that have already hampered a fresh start to the new year. Westjet is cutting jobs and slashing its flight capacity by a third because of what the airline calls the instability in the face of continuing federal government travel advisories and restrictions. About 1,000 employees will be affected. Some will be temporarily laid off, others will be furloughed or have their hours reduced. The Calgary-based airline is also pulling more than 200 international and 150 domestic flights from its schedule. London's situation critical coming up, how that city is buckling under the stress of COVID-19. Plus, the huge sinkhole that opened up next to a hospital in Italy. This happened in a parking lot outside a hospital in Naples, Italy. A giant sinkhole forced a nearby COVID-19 recovery ward to close temporarily. The sinkhole is about 50 meters long and wide, at least 15 meters deep. It swallowed up several cars, though the lot was mostly empty at the time, and no one was hurt. In the UK, the Mayor of London has declared a major incident, a move normally reserved for terror attacks or natural disasters. The rate of COVID-19 infection in the city is out of control. In London's worst-hit boroughs, it's believed 1 in 20 people have the virus. The UK reported its highest daily toll of the pandemic today, more than 1,300 deaths and 68,000 new infections in just 24 hours. As Redmond Shannon reports, hospital staff are barely coping.
Locked down London is now one of the epicentres of COVID-19. Infections in the UK capital and surrounding regions have hospitals on the brink.
Every single member of the NHS staff is going through so much. I mean, everywhere's understaffed, everywhere's getting put through all this. We're all at risk, we're all coming into work and putting ourselves at risk and our families.
Staffing is such an issue because so many medics have become patients themselves.
I want to help. I don't know when. I'm here as a patient. I'm helpless.
The more infectious variant of the virus, first found in the UK, is dominating new case numbers. Mayor Sadiq Khan has now declared a major incident. It allows emergency services to reprioritise and share resources, a step already taken in neighbouring counties.
So we've already diverted some of our firefighters to drive ambulances, and over the course of the next few days, police officers will begin driving ambulances as well.
There are almost 50% more COVID patients in UK hospitals now than during last April's peak.
1 out of 30 Londoners now has this virus, but in some parts of London, it's 1 out of 20.
The consequences on the health service are likely to be felt long after the pandemic.
Walkham's unit to find nurses crying. The physical and mental load is huge, and I'm really worried that we're going to break a lot of nurses.
On Thursday night, the weekly round of applause for frontline workers here in the UK returned for the first time since last spring. However, the winter weather and COVID fatigue seems to have affected participation. But the mayor and medics say if people really want to help, they should just stay at home. Donna?
All right, Redmond Shannon in London tonight, thanks. There has been lots of debate about whether the second dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccine needs to happen within the 4 weeks the manufacturers say is necessary. Today, the head of the World Health Organization's European region called on countries to be flexible with the timing if they have low supplies of the vaccines.
It is important that such a decision represents a safe compromise between the limited global production capacity at the moment and the imperative for governments to protect as many people as possible while reducing the burden of any subsequent wave on the health systems.
Prolonging the gap between doses by up to 12 weeks have generated fierce debate among scientists. Pfizer and BioNTech warns they have no evidence their vaccine would be as effective if the second dose is given more than 21 days after the first. Boeing owes billions. Still ahead, the crime and punishment facing the company over 2 fatal plane crashes. Boeing will pay $2.5 billion U.S. to settle a criminal investigation into 2 deadly 737 MAX plane crashes. The company admitted in court documents that 2 of its pilots deceived American regulators about a key safety system. The agreement does not force Boeing to plead guilty to criminal charges. The 737 MAX jet was grounded worldwide for 20 months after 2 deadly crashes killed 346 people, including 18 Canadians. 737 MAX jets are still pending approval to fly again from Transport Canada. Today marks a grim milestone. 1 year ago, 176 people were killed when Ukraine Airlines Flight 752 was shot down by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Almost half of the victims were Canadian citizens or permanent residents. All of the countries whose citizens died issued a joint statement today calling on Iran to provide a complete and thorough explanation of the events and decisions that led to the downing of the plane. It also says Tehran must compensate victims' families properly. Canada has rejected Iran's offer to pay $150,000 to each of the families, saying the final amount will be subject to negotiations. Tehran initially denied any involvement, but then admitted its military shot down the jet after mistaking it for a missile. Next, 1 year after the shooting down of that plane, the pain is still fresh. A year has barely dimmed the grief of those who lost loved ones on Ukraine Airlines Flight 752, and a lack of answers from Iran or anyone being held accountable is further compounding their grief. Farah Nasser spoke to an Ontario man who lost his wife and only son 1 year ago today.
1 year later, Shaheen Moghadam is about to eat the last meal his wife Shakiba made before she left for Iran. He kept it in the freezer for this day. The pain so deep and raw for a man who lost his past and his future in an instant. Shakiba and their only son, 9-year-old Rostin, died when Ukraine Airlines Flight 752 was shot down by the Iranian army. This photo was taken just before the mother and son boarded the doomed plane.
Hello everybody, welcome to another video.
Rostin's bedroom has stayed still for the past year, except for a memorial on the young boy's bed.
I can't go inside. The space is so heavy for me. I cannot go in.
There are memories in every corner of the house the family was in the process of renovating when the tragedy happened.
We built this house, me and Shakiba and even Rostin. I make this fireplace. Rostin gave me the stone, Shakiba gave me the other tools, and I just made it.
This year, Mogadam completed the home, just like his wife would have wanted, down to the wallpaper he had custom made from the pattern on one of Shakiba's dresses.
You know, I'm driving a lot during the night because I can't sleep. Many times it's happened to me. I see Rostin on the back seat, and I see at the beginning in the mirror, and then when I turn it back, I see, and it's happened almost every time.
He received a couple of suitcases of clothes and books from the flight's wreckage, but what he really wanted was his wife's wedding ring.
When I asked for it from the morgues, the doctor said, Mr. Mogadam, there is no finger for the ring. So there is no ring.
What does justice look like to you?
Everyone talks about the money, about the compensation. But for us, the money is nothing. The justice is the day which we show those who are responsible for these terrorist attacks. We see them in court.
Last month would have been Rostin's 10th birthday, which he celebrated without his son, his wife, and without justice. Farah Nasser, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight marks the end of a TV era. What is the game show Jeopardy without beloved host Alex Trebek? We leave you with a look back at the late Canadian's 37 years with the show. Tonight, Jeopardy will air Trebek's final taped episode, exactly 2 months after he died from pancreatic cancer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you back here on Monday. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.